The headline is not hyperbole. Russia is, in fact, running out of money, and this isn't a slow, abstract decline. It is a full-blown financial crisis that is now reaching a critical point, a crisis that has high-level officials scrambling for solutions. The end of money is not a metaphor. It is the brutal, undeniable reality of a nation whose leadership must find a way to plug a massive and growing hole in its budget. For years, Russia has been spending far more than it earns. This isn't a new problem, but its scale is now unprecedented since the late 1990s. The federal budget deficit has been growing at an alarming rate, and no one, from the Ministry of Finance to the central bank, can agree on a final number. We are seeing a flurry of emergency meetings at the highest levels of power, with the leader himself presiding over intense, high-stakes discussions with his economic team. The meetings, some of which were broadcast for mere moments, have revealed a palpable sense of anxiety. The questions are direct and desperate. Why is our growth slowing? Why is the economy shrinking? The answers, of course, are unsaid but known to all. The war has broken the Russian economy. And now they are faced with an impossible choice, a choice between two bad options to pay for the war. The first option is to continue financing the deficit through massive borrowing or by simply printing more money. The central bank has made its position crystal clear. In their view, this is the most dangerous path. It would flood the economy with cash, reignite inflation, and lead to a rapid devaluation of the ruble. It is a short-term fix that would guarantee long-term economic instability. The second option, and the one being aggressively lobbied for by the economic leadership, is to raise taxes. This is a last resort measure, a deeply unpopular move that will almost certainly have a negative effect on economic growth. However, for a government desperate for cash, it has a certain brutal logic. As the head of the central bank herself has stated, raising taxes is a preferable scheme because it is a stable, predictable source of revenue that withdraws money from the economy rather than injecting it through emissions. In other words, the nation's financial managers are arguing that it is better to strangle the economy slowly than to send it into a sudden inflationary death spiral. This is the ultimate contradiction of a war economy. To fund the war, the government is now being forced to take measures that will actively harm the very economy it claims to be protecting. The public is being prepared for a new reality of higher taxes, higher inflation, and a lower quality of life, all to pay for a war that has no end in sight. The budget for 2026 is already being openly referred to as a military budget by high-ranking officials, a clear sign that the spending and the financial strain will only get worse. The record-breaking deficit is not just a number. It is the physical manifestation of a financial system that is being squeezed from every possible direction to keep the military machine running for just another year. The days of easy money are over, and the financial shockwave is about to hit. We've established that Russia is facing a desperate crisis of cash. But the real story is not just about the numbers on a budget spreadsheet. It's about the very real, visible signs of an economy that is grinding to a halt. The machine that was supposed to power Russia to victory is now sputtering, its gears seizing up under the pressure of a war it cannot afford. This isn't a slow decline, it is a rapid, accelerating decay that is now reaching a critical point. The evidence of this economic decay is everywhere, if you're willing to look past the official state-run propaganda. A key symbol of Russia's industrial might, the Avtovaz car company, has been forced to take drastic action. It has announced a staggering 40% cut in its production plan and is transitioning to a 4-day workweek. This isn't just a sign of a struggling company, it's a symptom of a much larger crisis. It shows that there is a profound lack of demand in the domestic economy. The cars they are producing are not being sold, a clear signal that the Russian consumer, burdened by inflation and uncertainty, is pulling back. This isn't a temporary dip, it's a sign of a civilian economy that is being starved of resources and confidence. And the rot is not just in the auto industry. A recent survey of over 15,000 Russian enterprises by the central bank paints an even grimmer picture. The data shows that business climate, production volumes, and demand are all in a state of clear decline. The current business assessments are now firmly in the negative, and the only remaining optimism is based on a hope for the future that is quickly being eroded by the grim reality of the present. The central bank's own analysis is now balancing the economy on a razor's edge between stagnation and recession. These aren't just technical terms, they are the signposts on the road to economic collapse. The Russian economy is not just slowing down, it's being bled dry to fund a war that is consuming everything. But the most dangerous and unpredictable factor in this economic shock is an unexpected, self-inflicted wound. In a desperate attempt to cut their costs, Russian banks have begun to aggressively lower interest rates on deposits. The rates have now dropped to an average of just 15%, a massive fall from the 22% they were offering at the beginning of the year. This move is now threatening to trigger a mass withdrawal of cash from the banking system. Analysts are warning that this could lead to an outflow of up to 10 trillion rubles in cash from deposits. This isn't a small problem, it's a catastrophic one. A mass withdrawal of cash would destabilize the entire banking system and, ironically, create the very problem that the central bank is desperately trying to avoid by lobbying for higher taxes. This mass injection of cash into the economy would almost certainly trigger a new wave of inflation, sending the ruble into a freefall and making the war even more expensive to fund. This is the ultimate paradox of a war economy. To pay for the war, the government is being forced to take measures that are now actively destroying the civilian economy. The money being funneled into the military is not just starving the civilian sector, it's also creating a vicious cycle of decline. The economy is not just stagnating, it's being hollowed out to pay for a military machine that is consuming everything. And the machine itself is now beginning to break down under the weight of its own internal contradictions. The days of easy money are over, and the financial shockwave is about to hit. We've seen the self-inflicted wounds of Russia's economy, but a nation cannot fall from internal failures alone. The truth is, Russia is now under assault from all sides, and the international community has finally found a way to make sanctions not just a tool of political pressure, but a weapon of economic warfare. These aren't just empty words, they are new measures that are actively closing in on Russia's financial lifeline. The latest wave of sanctions from the European Union is a testament to this new, more determined approach. For months, Europe was criticized for its indecisiveness, for its continued reliance on Russian energy. But the new 19th sanctions package is a monumental step forward. The most significant measure is a full embargo on liquefied natural gas, LNG, which is set to take effect in 2027. While it may seem like a long time away, this is a massive, long-term blow that will cost Russia billions in revenue. More importantly, it is a policy that was previously resisted by major European nations, a sign that the political will to punish Russia has finally overcome economic self-interest. The sanctions are also targeting Russia's two largest state-owned oil companies, Rosneft and Gazprom Neft, by completely banning any direct transactions with them. This is a direct assault on the very heart of Russia's energy sector. But the most ingenious and effective part of this new sanctions regime is its focus on the shadow fleet. For years, Russia has been using an armada of aging, poorly maintained tankers to circumvent Western sanctions and continue selling its oil. This fleet has been the lifeblood of Russia's war economy, a key part of the logistical chain that has allowed it to continue to fund the war in Ukraine. But the world is now catching up. A major Indian port operator, Adani Group, has made a monumental decision to completely close its terminals to any tankers that are on Western sanctions lists. This is a game changer. This isn't just a handful of new sanctions, it's a strategic move that targets the logistical choke point of Russia's oil exports. By making it impossible for Russia to find ports to offload its oil, the international community is systematically choking off Russia's ability to sell its most important commodity. The consequences of these actions are already being felt. The combination of targeted sanctions and the internal sabotage of drone attacks is creating a perfect storm for Russia's oil industry. The system is under assault from two sides. From within, the drone strikes are causing a catastrophic loss of refining capacity and a widespread fuel crisis. From without, the international community is making it more and more difficult for Russia to export its oil and gas, cutting off the revenue that is the very lifeblood of the Russian state.
This is a strategy that is finally working. The sanctions are not just a political statement, they are a weapon. They are causing a reduction in Russia's export revenue, which is exacerbating the budget deficit and making it more and more difficult for Russia to fund the war. The entire system is now under a coordinated and relentless assault, and it is beginning to buckle under the pressure. The new sanctions package is a clear signal to Russia that the world is no longer willing to tolerate its aggression, and the consequences of that aggression are now coming home to roost.
We've chronicled the financial shock and the failing economy, but the final, most damning piece of evidence of Russia's impending collapse comes from the very top. In a rare moment of candor, a high-ranking official has let the truth slip. The upcoming 2026 budget is not a plan for prosperity, it's a plan for war. This is a chilling confession that proves the Russian leadership is not only unwilling to end this conflict, but it is also committing the country to a financial dead end from which there may be no return. The evidence is a stark, brutal confession. Speaking publicly, Dmitry Medvedev openly referred to the upcoming 2026 budget as military. This isn't just a choice of words, it's a statement of strategic intent. It is a public acknowledgement that the war in Ukraine is not a temporary operation that will be over soon. It is a long-term, structural part of the Russian state, a financial black hole that will consume every available resource for the foreseeable future. This is a direct admission that the Russian government is choosing to prioritize its war machine over the well-being of its own people. It's a confession that the nation is now a full-blown military state, and its economy is being repurposed to serve the needs of the military, not the needs of the public. But this confession of a military budget comes with a catastrophic problem. There is no money to pay for it. The government is committing to a massive increase in military spending in 2026, but the budget hole is only getting bigger. As we've seen, the Russian economy is in a state of terminal decline. The civilian sector is collapsing, sanctions are choking off export revenues, and a desperate search for money has led the government to take desperate and unsustainable measures. The promise of more military spending is a lie that the government cannot afford to keep. It's a promise that will only accelerate the country's financial collapse. This is the ultimate paradox of a war economy. The government is now forced into a no-win situation. It has to choose between ending the war and facing a complete economic collapse. The budget is not a plan for victory, it's a plan for self-destruction. The government's inability to choose the first option means the second is becoming more and more inevitable. It is a classic case of a regime that is so committed to a failed military adventure that it is willing to bankrupt the country to see it through. The financial dead end is a direct consequence of a failed political strategy. By starting this war, the Russian leadership has set in motion a series of events that it can no longer control. The sanctions, the economic collapse, and the drain of resources are all a direct result of that initial miscalculation. And the government's response, to commit to more spending in a budget that it cannot afford, is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of a regime that is so desperate and so disconnected from reality that it is willing to lie to its own people and to itself. The military budget is not a plan for victory. It is a monument to a complete and total failure.
We have meticulously chronicled the financial shock, the collapsing economy, the working sanctions, and the confession of a war budget that has no funding. Now we must deliver the final verdict on what it all means. The conclusion is inescapable, and it is a judgment that is now being passed on the entire Russian state. The panic is justified. The financial and economic realities of this war are now converging on a single, inevitable point of collapse. The victory of Ukraine is close not because it has suddenly become stronger, but because Russia is finally and irrevocably running out of resources. This isn't a problem of tactics or strategy, it's a terminal diagnosis for a war machine that has been built on a foundation of lies. The Russian leadership believed it could fight a long, protracted war of attrition and outlast the West. But they have found themselves in a no-win situation. The budget deficit is a gaping hole that they cannot fill. The civilian economy is grinding to a halt, with factories closing and prices soaring. The sanctions, which were once dismissed as an inconvenience, are now a real and present danger, choking off export revenues and making it impossible to sell their oil and gas. All of these factors are now converging on a single point: the complete and total exhaustion of Russia's financial resources. The war, in its current form, is no longer sustainable. And this isn't just an economic problem, it's a political one. For a dictator who has built his power on a narrative of strength and stability, the public signs of a failing economy are a direct threat to his rule. The fuel shortages, the empty car factories, the rising prices, these are all a public confession of a state that is failing to provide for its own people. This is the ultimate political risk for a regime that has staked its entire legitimacy on its ability to deliver prosperity and order. The panic is justified because the Russian leadership now knows that its financial resources are finite, and the war, in its current form, is a terminal event. The final verdict is that Putin's gamble has failed. He believed he could win a prolonged war, but he has found that his financial resources are not infinite. He believed he could outlast the West, but he has found that the international community has finally found a way to make sanctions bite. And he believed he could deceive his own people with a narrative of victory, but the reality of a collapsing economy and a financial crisis is now staring them in the face. The war is not just a clash of armies, it is a battle of economic and political will. And Russia's will is now being tested in a way that it has never been before. The victory of Ukraine is close not because it has suddenly become stronger, but because Russia is now in a position where it cannot continue the war without facing a complete and utter economic collapse. The Russian leadership now knows that its financial resources are finite, and the war, in its current form, is a terminal event. The panic is justified because the Russian leadership now knows that the war is lost, and the only question that remains is how much more they are willing to lose before they admit it.